And now, we come to the next speaker without further ado. It's Angie. Angie's an amazing person, and we met. I think now it's been a couple of years that I've known her, and she is so much of an all-rounder that that I felt very difficult in summarizing her scope of what she does, because when I saw her profile, it has anything and everything that has to do with the dynamics of a dental office, be it team training, be it communication, you name it, and she's done it. And she's truly what we call as a diverse professional: dental practice management, coaching, mentoring, transitions, speaking, startups, and financials, communications, soft skill, you name it. So what I thought was that one of her key assets is her experience in communication. And we've tried to bring that together with both herself and even with Sean. So these next sessions are going to delve into the communication side, and I would invite Angie to take over and check if she's able to share her screen, and then obviously take us through the next 45 minutes in what's going to be a session that has a lot of communication, especially with regards to patients.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you for being here, Angie. And
yeah, happy to be here.
We reached out to you to help our foreign trained group with establishing excellent patient communication, which is obviously key to their success.
Yes. Don't know if you can see. Am I sharing my screen now?
And see your screen, yes.
Okay, give me 1 second here. You can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay.
You can see the desktop, yes, and now your PowerPoint.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for that presentation that, Vic gave. Excellent, always very informative, very powerful, and giving us all information on how to grow. And what I'm going to be talking about today is, patient communication, is how exactly we communicate with our patients. Because once you have all the vital stuff that, and great information that Vic gave, and you can put your practice together and your financials, now it's a matter of how we communicate with those patients. And the point of keeping those communications open with your patients is that you want to create a relationship in which they become your most loyal promoters. You want to make sure that they're out there in the community with their family, with everybody, letting them know that you are the practice to go to. You are the dentist that should be seen. You are the up and coming one that is able to do anything and everything, and that you're honest and they can trust you, because that's one of our main things in communication with our patients is when we communicate properly, it develops that trust factor. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience. So I've been in dentistry for over 42 years, so makes me a dinosaur in it. I got my business degree, and after that I attended law school. I graduated from law school, but then I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, so I never took the bar exam. A lot of people ask me, why? Why wouldn't you want to be a lawyer? And I said, the reason that I didn't want to be a lawyer was because I discovered that I have that type of personality that if you're guilty, I'm going to make sure that you go to jail. So that doesn't make for a very good defense lawyer. And they said, well, why didn't you go into prosecution? It was just a little not, there's too much, there's no gray. There's either black or white. You're either guilty or not. And there's not a lot of the human factor left to go into that. It's very analytical. It's very law driven. And I didn't want to do that, but I love the part of law. Right now, I'm also getting my certificate in cognitive behavior, which allows me to really look into the psychology of how people behave, mostly patients. I worked my way through the back office. When I was a teenager, I was a dental assistant, then moved on to management and regional management. And in California, the DSOs were more common back then. We're talking back in the 80s. And we're talking about the DSO that I worked for at that time. The name of the company was Safeguard. Safeguard, when I left, owned over 1,000 offices. They had offices in California, in Texas, and Florida. So it was a huge, huge conglomerate of offices. And they gave us really extensive training. At one point, I decided that I wanted to come to Canada. So I immigrated to Canada, and I'm originally from Mexico. 28 years ago, when I came to Canada, I could not find a job to save my life. It was funny because everyone that I gave my CV to, they would read it and they would say, yeah, but you don't have any, experience in Canada. And I thought to myself, are you kidding me? Look at all the experience that I have. I have corporate experience. I've been in dentistry forever and a year. How could you not want to hire me? And that was the excuse that I got time after time. So what I decided that since I could not find a job, I created myself a job. So I started consulting. And I had my first office in Scarborough, in not a very good area of Canada, or Ontario, I may say. And it was a difficult area, a lot of OHIP patients, a lot of welfare was coming in, a lot of people that didn't have any money. It was quite demographically not the best, and also financially not the best. And when I sat the partners down and I started speaking to them about what was possible, one of the things that they kept telling me was that the reasons why there wasn't a lot of case acceptance was because they didn't have the money for it. So I challenged them. I said, is there a possibility that we can think outside of the box? And one of the things that I started doing is that I started observing, because we were in a mall, I started observing the type of clientele that were coming in and what they were pulling up in, and also how they were dressed. And it was hilarious because I started seeing that some of these people were pulling up in Escalades. Some of these people were pulling up in Navigators. Some of the people were pulling up in Mercedes. And also when they came in, I started observing their clothes. Some of these tennis shoes, at least I didn't know back then until after my son, became a sneakerhead, that some of these shoes are just outrageously expensive. So I thought it's a matter of priorities. It really is. It's a matter of priorities, and it's a matter of how we're communicating with these patients. And it's a matter of really gaining that trust and really finding out what we call the M&M, what matters most to the patient. Because at the end of the day, it matters not what we think. It matters not what we want to do. It doesn't matter how great your margins are. It doesn't matter how great your composites are. And it does not matter how fantastic your clinic looks or what equipment you have. If you are not able to get across to that other person that you care, to make sure that there's trust on their side. So one of the things that I want to make sure is make yourself understood. Being misunderstood is a natural condition, according to psychologist Dr. Joseph Bentley. He says that these things are required if you want to be understood. Number one, have a sincere desire to communicate clearly. So what do I mean by that? Or how does it translate into dentistry? And how it translates into dentistry is I hear a lot of doctors, hygienists, or the team in general start talking about technical terms, when they talk to patients, they actually use technical terms to communicate with them. They talk about their buccal, they talk about their endo, they talk about how they're going to be putting some gutta percha in there. So, and they also start using terminology that scares the bejesus out of them. Like, for example, when they use the word scaling. Seriously, who wants to be scaled? If this was an audience, I would have you raise your hands. Who here would like to be scaled? I guarantee you not one hand would go up. Nobody wants to be scaled. Nobody wants to be probed. So we have to really look at what type of wording are we using? How are we not communicating clearly with our patients and actually scaring them? Make sure that we're using terminology that is changed. Instead of using the word scaling, how about gently removing tartar? In other words that are not going to be scaring your patients. The next one is make an effort and concentrate. That's another one. There's been many times that I've been in an office where the patient is communicating with the provider, and the provider is either looking another way, looking down, looking at the computer, but not really doing the eye to eye. It's really important that when you're sitting with your patient, one of my most favorite tips to give is always knee to knee, toe to toe. If you're knee to knee, toe to toe, you will always know that they are listening to you and they know that you're listening to them. So make sure that you make an effort to communicate clearly. Have the patients to continue a dialogue until the other person signals that she or he understands. So in other words, you want to make sure that you do not cut them off, that you do not stop the communication because you've said what you had to say. You want to continue. And one of my favorite things to do is always ask, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Patient will always tell you, well, that's all I have to say. Great. Now we can move on. But when you've asked a patient, tell me more, you are showing that there's interest. The last one is discovering the M&M of the other person. Now, what do I mean by M&M? That means the matters most. What matters most to them? You may think that what is most important to them may not be what actually is. For example, I'm going to tell you a little story. I went in to get my car fixed. I went into the mechanic, and there was this noise that my car was making. Every single time I made a right turn, I got this clanking sound, going clank, 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 and I didn't know what it was. So I didn't, want to drive around with this noise because it scared me. So I took it into the mechanic. The mechanic, put it up on the hoist, looked at it, and said, no worries, we'll take care of it. Okay, when do I come back? Come back in about 3 hours. It should be done. I said, okay. So I came back 3 hours later, and my car was completed. Then he gives me a bill, and it was a little under $1,000. And I said, okay, so, paid the bill, walked out, drove away. And as I was leaving the plaza and making that right-hand turn, what do I hear? Clank, clank, clank again. Are you kidding me? I just paid close to $1,000 to get supposedly this noise to dissipate. So I go back into the mechanic and I ask him, what happened? So the mechanic turns around and tells me, well, we didn't fix that because there was another issue that was more important. And I cannot in good conscience let you go onto the road when that issue is happening. Now, forgive me for you men or ladies that know about mechanics. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to that, so I don't remember exactly what he told me was wrong. But I was really upset because what mattered most to me at that moment was that clanking sound. Now, does it mean that if he would have told me about this other issue, I would have said no? I don't know, to tell you the truth, but he should have communicated with me. He should have told me, yes, we can take care of that clanking sound, but this other issue is also pressing, instead of going ahead and making a decision for me. I see that happen a lot in the dental office. I see patients coming in saying, this tooth right here, you see this stain? I really would like that stain to go away. And what usually happens with dentists is they open, they do the examination, and they find, there's some perio disease going on. There's a couple of fillings that have cracks in them. They look like there's some infections might be starting in some of the gum area. So they start talking about that. And that is pressing. It is important. But what happened is that I hear this all the time. The patient will get the treatment plan, walk out, to never, ever come back. Why? Because we didn't take care of what matters most to the patient. So it is imperative that we always find out what matters most to them and do that. Now, I know that there's a thing called supervised neglect. We don't want to turn around and neglect what may be important, but we want to address it instead of ignoring it. While advanced communication skills are not really necessary, they are very helpful. Here are some that you can use. Echoing. And this is a great way. I love this example. So here's what I heard. So let's say that I have a patient in the chair. So Mrs. Smith, what I heard was that what matters most to you is to have a beautiful smile, not so much a functioning one. Even though we know the functioning functioning bite is important, but what matters most to this particular patient is the appearance. So now that we can communicate and we know what matters most to them, maybe we can get around with it saying, in order for me to give you that smile that looks beautiful, that Hollywood smile, we need to take care of your bite so that you no longer have that overbite. And now you can have that Hollywood smile. So I still got what's important done, but I also acknowledge what's important to them. That's the most important thing. So here's what I heard. Am I correct? Checking. My understanding of what you meant about what it's important to you is this. Am I on the right track? Another one is encouraging. Tell me once more. I like to understand it better. Tell me more about that. When we encourage another person to tell us more about what they're thinking or what they're feeling, there's a sense of trust. There's a sense of, oh, you care. You care what I have to say. You are actually listening. And one of the things that very few people have a degree on, or very few people have taken any lessons or any type of studies, is in the art of listening. Most of us listen with the intent to respond. In other words, when somebody is talking, in our head, we're already thinking of how we're going to respond to what they are saying. Listening is an art. Listening is the ability to put our ego aside and put whatever it is in our mind blank. Make it a blank slate so that we can actually absorb what the other person is saying, what the other person is trying to communicate to us. Because a lot of the communication is not always verbal. Some of it is also physical. There's body language. There's tone of voice. There's other things that are important in the communication spectrum. While we are often misunderstood, concludes Dr. Bentley, we don't have to be. We can move from misunderstanding to understanding if we are willing to pay the price. What does it mean by willing to pay the price? Willing to pay the price is actually moving beyond our ego, beyond the time constraints that we would have of thinking, I have to be somewhere, probably have another patient. Oh, wow, whatever this person is saying is really boring me to death. Have to be able to move beyond that and really have eye contact and listen to what the patient has to say. If we are able to extract what matters most to them, you will convert your patients into loyal, promoting patients. Making every word count. After considerable research, psychologist Dr. M. Larry discovered many ways in which people tend to lose the attention of others. In other words, ways that we can lose the attention of other patients. The idea of recounting them is, of course, not to strive to qualify, but to avoid the trap. Here are 5 examples. Number 1, this is my absolute favorite lately, COVID-sation. Every time, and this has happened to me now, I've gone in for my cleaning, and it was funny because my hygienist, all she could talk about was the conversation of COVID. And, and this is what happened to me, and this is what, happened in my home, and oh my God, and my family, and we can go anywhere, and all the places were shut, and I had to sit and stand, and I had to wait in line for hours. It was just on and on and on and on about her. So, but it was all in a negative tone. And what makes a person have a negative tone? Somebody that's big-headed, that only cares about themselves, somebody that's arrogant, patronizing, pompous, vain, callous, and self-centered. Being negative and self-centered, complaining and talking mostly about oneself, or having a COVID-sation and trying to one-up the patient. Now, what do I mean by one-up the patient? When the hygienist finally ceased to talk, and I said, yeah, it was very difficult. And I tried to share with her how one of my very beloved neighbors had passed away from it. And I really, really cared for him. And she said to me when I pretty much got that much out, she said, oh yes, that happened to me too. And my aunt, and she just went on and on. So she was one-upping me. It's like, yeah, you had a bad, time with that, but guess what? My time was way worse than yours. We shouldn't be one-upping the patients. We should avoid COVID-sation in general. The only time that the COVID conversation should come up is if the patient brings it up, and then listen. Listen to what they have to say. Be empathetic. Pay close attention, because you might find out something that's going to move your relationship with them forward, so that now they trust you and you become their provider for life. The next one, this guy is not having a very good day. Being trite, telling the same story over and over again, or being able to talk about only one subject, giving the same diagnosis without a different format. Now, we all know that we've had patients in the chair. We talk to them about that one crown that they have to get. And we repeat it in the exact same format. We never change it. And many times we have patients do the old rolling their eyes like, oh, she's going to talk to me about that crown again. I don't want that crown done. So what do? How do we change it up? Be creative. Find ways so that it is self-discovery. The best way to get somebody to move forward with something is through self-discovery. So I always say in your morning huddle, and by the way, if you're not having your morning huddles, please do. They're vitally important. So in your morning huddle, when you're looking at your patients that are going to come in that day, and you see that you're going to see Mr. Smith here, and he needs a crown done. And somebody will say, oh, we keep telling him about the crown, but he's just not moving forward with it. He keeps giving us any excuse. There's the money can't be an excuse because he has dual insurance. So we don't understand why he doesn't move forward with it. Well, we need to find out what his M&M is. And I always say, take an intraoral picture of that tooth that's deteriorating. No tooth that needs a crown is usually deteriorating. So the only way that the patient is going to understand it is visually sometimes. So you want to make sure that you take a picture of it so you can show the patient, and then you ask them what matters most to them. And it's usually about money. It's usually about pain. It's usually about fear. It's usually about appearance. So there's quite a few of them that I always say that what moves a patient either forward or stops them from moving forward. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that pain is the motivator of that particular patient. I always say, that eventually that tooth is going to hurt that patient, but right now, since it's not hurting them, they don't care. And that their motivator is pain, because every time they have any type of pain, they're the first ones to call you and say, I want to come now. So what you want to do is you want to ask in this format. So Mr. Smith, I see that we haven't done that crown yet. Is it hurting you yet? Watch his eyes open really wide. Why? Because that's what matters to them. What you would say, Mr. Smith, well, what do you mean? Is it hurting yet? Is it going to hurt? Eventually it will, Mr. Smith. It's deteriorating. I can see that it's ready to crack. Look at the picture that Sally took. Can you see the part where it's starting to deteriorate even more? But now the patient, you're talking about what matters to them. Pain. They don't want to have any pain. So Mr. Smith, I know that pain is not your favorite thing. So if I had a way to resolve that and make sure that you didn't have any pain on that particular tooth, would you want to move forward with that? Mr. Smith would say, absolutely. If we can avoid any type of pain, well, why don't we go ahead and get you scheduled for that crown? Since you have dual insurance, you don't have to pay any pocket. We don't anticipate you paying any out-of-pocket costs. That's one way. So you want to make sure, find out what matters most to them, but also diagnose in a different way. Don't keep repeating the same thing again and again. Still not having a good day. The next one is show little emotion, being monotonous in speech, and displaying little facial expression. So that's another one that I see a lot too, is when dentists come in and they cross their arms and they lean back into the counter. And they just kind of sit there and motionless, and they stand. That's another one. They just keep standing through the whole appointment. And the patient is there looking up to them, trying to see what is it that the dentist is going to say. What happens when you do that? And I want you all to do that experiment. I want you to, when you're home, sit down and have somebody close to you, preferably an adult, not a child, stand right next to you and look down at you and talk to you while you're in that chair. And get as close as possible. Get as close as you usually get to your patients. And tell me how that feels. It feels intimidating. It feels cold. It feels like you're invading their space. So again, back to the same one that I said previously. Knee to knee, toe to toe, eye to eye. Make sure you're there at their level and try mirroring their emotion. Now, what do I mean by that? We've all heard different formats or different ways of expressing mirroring. And that is that we want to make sure that if they're happy and jovial, we want to be happy as well. If they're kind of serious, we want to be serious. If they're scared, we want to offer calming effect. We want to bring our voice down. We want to be reassuring. So we want to be in the space that they're in instead of our own space, instead of our own, in our heads, as some people would say. The next thing, blah, 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 blah. Some people talk too much. They just go on and on and on. And you know at some point you got the point and you just want them to shut up. Well, I've been victim of many of those people when sometimes dentists just go on, and what happens is they actually talk patients out of treatment. Being tedious or unduly slow, talking too much, time to make a simple point, or telling a story or repeatedly digressing from the main point. Oh my goodness, I've heard this so many times from assistants, from hygienists, where they say, I had the patient. The patient was going to move forward. But then what happened? They just talked the patient out of the treatment. Sometimes when we keep talking and we don't get to the point, instead of doing something that is constructive, we're actually doing something that's damaging, meaning that we talk too much and talk the patient right out of getting what they wanted to get because we start explaining too much about the procedure. If the patient is already afraid, they don't want to know details about the procedure. They don't want to know that you're going to be extracting that tooth, opening the cavities, cutting down the gums, pulling them down, and putting in some bone in there. They don't want the graphic details. So if you're saying those kind of details when you know the patient is squeamish, when you know the patient is already afraid, you're talking them out of a procedure. So make sure you don't talk patients out of a procedure. Another one. This is one of my favorite cartoons. Welcome to the Narcissist Anonymous. Now, before we get started, let's talk about me for a while. Joe. So that's another one, dominating the conversation or constantly interrupting or remaining entirely passive and not participating in the conversation. Either one of them are just as bad. So you want to make sure, again, ask a lot of questions. You want to ask questions about them, about the patient, how they feel, what do they want, what exactly would make them happy, what matters most to them. Discovering the M&M. Now here, it's about connecting the patient to things he or she already knows or is able to imagine. This one is really important. One of the things that I always like to do when I'm talking to a patient and I'm talking to them about treatment, I like to do it in ways that they can understand. In other words, draw a mental picture of what that would look like. If I'm talking, for example, to a man that knows a little bit about construction, and I'm going to talk to them about an implant, I'm going to give them the example of, say, hanging a picture in drywall. And I would probably say, you know how when you're hanging something heavy in your home, what do you usually have to do? You usually have to put a plug in, those little plastic thingamajiggies is what I call them. They're plastic plugs. And you put them into the wall, screw them in, and then after that, it gives the ability to hold a screw. Then you screw in a screw into that plug so that it can hold the weight of that picture or whatever it is that you're hanging, whether it be a TV or whatever it is that has substantial weight. That is the same concept that we have when we're doing an implant on you. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Smith? And usually I get, oh, okay, I got it. Another example that I like to use also is the post for fence. You know, when you dig your hole into the ground in order to put that big post, to then put the wood post in that thingamajiggy that's holding it, it's the same concept. So you want to talk to people in concepts in which they understand, whether it's a female or a male. When I'm talking to a female, and let's just say that, and I'm not saying that women don't know about construction. Lots of us do. I may not know the names, but I know how to do it. So, but let's say if somebody's talking to me about a composite or a veneer, I digress, a veneer. The best way for me to explain it to, say, a younger lady, and I see that she has her nails done, and I see that she has, you know, the composite nails, because that's exactly what they're made out of. They're made out of resin. So I say, you know, when you go to the beauty salon and you have your nails done, you know how they file down your nails just, so ever so slightly in order to get that composite to hold that resin. And then they put in a liquid. And then after that, they put a powder, which creates that resin nail that you have on. Well, that's pretty much the same concept, except we're not using a powder. We're using a porcelain. And we're also going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to slightly, ever so slightly, file down your tooth in order to put that veneer on. And these are, so keep looking at creative ways. Don't use the same one for everybody. Kind of gauge the patient. Look at the patient and say, I wonder if this patient would know about that. The next one. Herein lies the wisdom of using metaphors, which I just used. Metaphors state the unknown in new communications, in new combinations of the known. Sorry. An example of a metaphor would be killing them with kindness. It creates a picture. Creating a picture is some of the most important and most powerful ways of communicating with a patient. Also, we think and remember best in pictures. So with that, I'm now open to any questions. And I will stop sharing.
Amazing, Angie. Thank you so much for all that wealth of knowledge and experience that has to do with communication. Communication definitely with patients is one of the most important areas that we need to get a grip on. So over to the audience, any questions for Angie? Any particular challenges that you face, or some comments or feedback if you want to chime in on sharing some thoughts?
I know I moved a bit fast, but I wanted to be cognizant of the next speaker. So
great job at that. I appreciate that.